Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where Richard and I go deep on behavioral science and seek out the most practical applications for marketers and brand leaders. Our goal is to take behavioral science, which has become such an important field in the UK and in Europe, and bring it into America so that marketers and brand leaders in America can see how to apply it in their business. And today, we're talking one of America's favorite companies, Richard, Disneyland, and the Walt Disney Company. We're talking lines, wristbands, and Mickey Mouse today. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Let's get into it. So, Richard, the story of Disney is really a fascinating study for people that are interested in business, people that are interested in the American story, the American dream. And it all starts with Walt and Roy Disney, who are two brothers. In 1923, they create the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio. And their vision is that Walt is very interested in a certain type of animation that's becoming the rage. 1928, Steamboat Willie is one of their first big hits where Mickey Mouse is introduced to the world, what would become Mickey Mouse. But it's not until 1937 that they have their first smash hit, which is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So the story of Disney is one of a lot of twists and turns and creating of videos or of cartoons to really build the brand. And it's not until the 1950s that the idea for a Disney park comes into existence. The story goes, Walt Disney is with his daughters visiting theme parks, and it's a terrible experience. The lines are long, the parks are not so clean, and Walt Disney has an idea. Can I take the magic that we've created in the animation studio and bring it to a physical space? And he comes up with a bold and ambitious plan. He announces in July of 1953 that they're going to do Disneyland in California. And a year later, he promises it will open. This sets off a crazy stream of construction all night, 7 days a week, building Disneyland's first opening in 1954. But what opens is something unlike the world's ever seen. It has characters, it's got rides, it's a whole different experience. And that really kicks off a whole other way to engage with Disney. Now we look back almost 80 years later, and it seems so far away how long ago that was. But without the start in the cartoon animation studio and then the creation of the parks, Disney would not have the foundation of its mega business that it has today. How big was Disney growing up for you in the United Kingdom?
I think it's big, and one of the exciting things that I can remember as a child or was moving over to Europe. Disneyland Paris is a massive thing, actually easy to get to rather than going to Orlando or California.
Right. And was there cartoons on the television?
So Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, they were part of your childhood. I think didn't even realise to begin with they were American. It just felt like something that's always on TV.
It's such part of the magic of Disney to really feel like it's a part of everyone's culture. And it's something that I think so many identify, at least in America, with, people want to give a trip to Disney World or Disneyland to their kids. It's part of the American experience of growing up. And it's such a powerful brand because it holds, the imagination of wonder and of childhood. It's such an exciting brand. So interesting business path.
Yeah.
But they're using behavioral science in so much of the park's experience. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. So you mentioned one of the things that motivated Walt Disney to set up the parks in the first place was the irritation with other parks and how they had these long queues. Well, Disney certainly apply some principles from psychology to queuing. There's a fascinating idea. Original studies were done by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in 2002, and Donald Radelmeyer, and they came up with an idea called the peak end rule. So their first experiments back in the 1990s were on colonoscopy patients. These are
A lovely topic to do studies on.
a strange thing to suddenly decide you're going to experiment on.
But a big moment in the people's lives that have it.
It's a deeply unpleasant experience.
Right.
And in all seriousness, people don't go for colonoscopies because they're really painful.
That's right.
So they were interested in how you could change people's memory of the pain of the operation and therefore encourage them to go back again. So they recruit these colonoscopy patients, hundreds of colonoscopy patients. They go in for genuine operations. And when people go in for the operation, they are given a handheld device. So it's about the size of a mobile phone. And every minute, the device buzzes. And then when the device buzzes, people have to twist a dial to say how much pain they're in.
10 is the worst.
10's horrendous, 0's nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Operation lasts about 15 minutes. So they get 15 ratings from what they call the experiencing self. These are in-moment ratings. They then wait for the operation to be over. They wait for the patient to leave the hospital. And as they're leaving, they ask the patient to give another rating reflecting back on the overall level of pain.
After the experience is over.
Absolutely. So they call this the remembering self. This is a reflective rating. They recontact the patient 2 months later, ask them the same question again. So now they have 15 ratings in moment, 2 ratings afterwards. The expectation before they did this was that those 2 numbers should roughly be the same.
Makes sense.
What we experience should be a pretty good guide to what we remember. But that wasn't the case. What they found was the actual experience, the average rating of pain during the operation was only a pretty rough guide to what people remembered. What was a much better guide were 2 moments in particular. So what they called the peak moment, in the case of colonoscopies, the most painful moment, that was disproportionately important in shaping people's memories. And the final moment of the operation, that was super important as well. And when I say super important, what I mean is one person can have a low level of pain all the way through, and then 2 or 3 levels of medium pain at the end. And they would remember that operation worse than someone who had 13 minutes of pain at the beginning and then 2 minutes of no pain. So it's the end that shapes people's memories, and it's this peak moment that shapes people's memories. They sensibly enough called this the peak end rule. And I know colonoscopy sounds a long way from
Disney
World, but there is a relevant application. What Disney have realised is your memory of a cue is not just shaped by the amount of time that you spend in it. It's really shaped by how you feel at the final few minutes. So what they do very cleverly is you go to the queue. There's a big digital signboard which says expected wait time is 50 minutes, say. What they're actually doing there is artificially inflating those times. They know pretty reasonably how long it's actually going to take. And if they think it's going to take 45 minutes, say, they'll tell you it's 50 or 55.
Just a few minutes more.
So when you get to the end of the queue, you're thinking, oh my gosh, it was only 45 minutes. This has moved 10 minutes quicker than expected. So they're trading off slightly higher level of irritation at the beginning of the queue, but it ends on a positive note. And it's that positive final moment that shapes people's memory of how bad the queues are. And when they talk to people 2 weeks later, 6 months later, they'll be much more positive about describing those cues than if they had been very accurate in telling you the absolute and actual length of the queue.
And this is big business for them. Disney Parks has 58 million people coming to it each year. So the way that you experience the parks matters in the moment for revenue and for complaints on site. But what you remember after is going to be what you recommend to friends and what they do next. So, I mean, the memory is really critical.
Yeah, and to be fair to them, they apply psychological ideas to the actual experience of the queue as well. So we know that people find queues more frustrating if there's a degree of uncertainty. So the simple fact of telling people how long the queue's going to be, you can mentally say to yourself, well, it's going to be 50 minutes. I'll start reading my book. Whereas if there's no time, you're constantly on edge thinking, will it be 50 minutes? Will it be 45? So giving people certainty allows them to put their mind at rest. And then the second point is, if you entertain people during a queue, it's a very different experience than leaving people
unentertained.
Yeah.
And when we looked at what Disney does, there's quite a bit of things. One, they add misters. They have seats. They're doing things for that whole 50-minute line. You're not standing up. They have characters that come through and engage with the people. So it does, the LED screens that you can learn more about the story before you go on the ride. There's quite a bit of engineering and planning for the line experience itself.
Yeah, yes. And what's really nice is they often tailor the entertainment to the queue. So if you are queuing up for a Wild West ride, there'll be a very different set of puzzles and entertainment than a
space out of space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're firstly creating a better experience throughout the line, less irritation about the queue, and then secondly, by using this peak end rule, they are playing with your memories, so it avoids negative word of mouth afterwards.
And, if you just take a step back and you think about your memory of what you did yesterday or what you did with your family last weekend, the peak end rule applies just to the way you recall all moments. It's a similar experience.
Absolutely. And you can see this not just being applied in Disney. Loads of businesses take this insight and apply it. One of my favorite examples, and I don't know if this brand stretches to the US, Flatiron Steaks.
No.
Yeah. So it's only a small brand in the UK, maybe 10 different outlets. And it's a steak restaurant, really nice steak. But the clever thing they do is at the end, crucially after you've paid the bill, I think, they give you this tiny little metal knife, like two knives, steak knives crossed over.
Yes.
And they say, when you're leaving, just hand this in to the person at the door. You hand your little mini steak knives in, and then they pull back a curtain and there's a little row of ice creams and they give you a little scoop of salted caramel ice cream. Now that costs them pennies. But because it's done after the bill, it feels like genuine generosity. Whereas if they'd done it at the beginning, it would have felt like a ploy to get you to leave a bigger tip. So I think it feels more genuine. But secondly, when you think about it from the peak end point of view, it's that is a peak moment. That's the thing you're going to remember. And putting a peak moment right at the end makes it super memorable. That's the thing you're going to remember about their restaurant a year later, 2 years later.
It's a great connection. In my own life, we go to a diner in New Jersey for breakfast on a Sunday with my family, and always at the diner, after you pay, the woman at the counter has little breakfast cookies to give to each of the kids.
Yeah.
And when we ask, where do you want to go for breakfast on Sunday? They want to go to the place that has cookies after breakfast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same concept.
Absolutely. And what I really like is often, if you look at well-run small businesses,
that's right,
they're often, I think, better at sometimes applying behavioral science ideas than massive corporations. And I think the reason is they are dealing directly with customers. So over time, they learn what actually influences them rather than what people claim influences them. Whereas compare that with big brands. Big brands outsource their insight, they outsource their research. They rely on focus groups, they rely on surveys. And it's this kind of intermediation effect, I think, this disconnect, yes, that stops you learning from behaviour and instead encourages you to learn from the far less accurate claims of consumers.
A theme that we've been talking about, you and I, off camera, on camera, has been getting closer to the end consumer. It's such a big unlock for brands. And our small businesses are the ones that do it so naturally because they're running businesses where they're interacting with the consumer every day. So the more that our listeners can say to themselves, what's the way I can get into my consumers' lives, into where the buyers are, and just see it, even if I'm not a professional researcher, it gives you so much more access.
I reckon if you're a marketer at McDonald's, you would gain more from spending 2 weeks working at McDonald's than paying $500,000 to a research company to go and do a report.
Absolutely.
We learn explicitly by reading reports, but we also learn implicitly by experience. And most businesses have put too much emphasis on explicit learning rather than implicit learning.
Wonderful. Well, let's take a break here. When we come back, we've got more talk on Disney parks and a way that Disney parks has really innovated you controlling your own peak. And we'll more on that when we come back.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One. Method One builds digital-first marketing systems that help brands grow. They are behavior change experts who solve business challenges by creating meaningful connections with consumers, with deep disciplines in many brand categories. Reach out to them if you'd like to be leveraging behavioral science in your marketing or advertising.
Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands. Richard Schotten and I have been talking deeply about Disney parks and just talking about the wonder of being a child and thinking about Disney and thinking about the characters. And when we left off before the break, we were talking about the peak end rule and the ability for Disney to really have manipulated the experience in the line to give you a positive remembrance when you leave. Something else that they've done really interestingly, in 2013, they introduced a technology called a magic band. And a magic band is an RFID chip on a wristband. That RFID chip, when it first launched, allowed you to go through, unlock your hotel room door, get into the park. It was your admission to the park. They take photos throughout the entire park, and it captures who you are and it remembers you. So at the end of your Disney trip, you have pictures of you and your family, all controlled by the magic band. And so what they've done is they've been collecting these peak moments for you, and they're reducing all those pain of waiting in line to get into the park or waiting online through the use of the magic band. What I thought was so interesting is they also tied it to skipping the lines. And that was fascinating because when you get the magic band, you can then opt in for what's now called Disney Genie, and it allows you to choose the lightning lanes and skip ahead. How do you think controlling the rides you're most excited about, getting to skip those lines, plays into this conversation of the peak end rule?
There's I think there's another bias actually that relates very closely to that element of choice, which is a wonderful study by Ellen Langer at Harvard. So mid-70s, and she goes around office blocks and she tries to sell the workers there lottery tickets. So all the lottery tickets are sold for $1. Sometimes though, she says to people, here are your numbers. Look out for these ones, and if you get them, you win. Other times she says, pick your numbers. She then waits a week. Just before the draw is going to take place, she goes back to the office and she tries to buy the tickets from the
tries to buy them back.
Yeah, tries to buy them back.
Yeah.
So the people who were given their numbers had no choice. They won $1.96 on average. They want more than they paid. That's an idea called the endowment effect. Once we own something, we value it more. But she wasn't interested in the endowment effect. She was interested in the variation between people who'd been given numbers and people who'd picked. And she found that those people who'd chosen their own numbers wanted more than 4 times as much to sell them back. $8.67, I think. Now, her argument about this massive change in valuation of an item is, she says, one of the big drives of human behavior is a desire to retain a sense of control, a desire to retain a sense of agency.
They picked the numbers, so they felt more agency over that lottery tickets.
Absolutely. Yeah. So even though a lottery ticket is a commodity, you have no greater probability of winning. The fact that you've chosen a superficial part of that, it gives you more investment, makes you feel an element of control, and therefore you value it more. So what's nice about those that scheme, those magic bands that you mentioned, was it's not they tell you, okay, rides A, B, and C, you get to skip the line. Giving people that cursory degree of control, it makes the offering more valuable. And I think many brands could apply that. We often assume, well, I'm giving you something for free.
Take it.
The value's in the item I'm giving you. Actually, the same item will be valued more if there's a degree of control.
Fascinating. And it makes sense that those that have some authority and autonomy on what they got will have a deeper connection to it. Yeah.
An example of that I really like in the UK, there is an upmarket supermarket called Waitrose.
Okay.
And you've purchased your items at Waitrose, you've paid, and then they give you this little green token, like a chip.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are 3 boxes at the exit. Each box represents a charity. They give you a little description of the charity, and then you put the token into the charity you think deserves some money. So each month, the charity that gets the most votes essentially gets a big donation from Waitrose. That's the illusion of control, I think. What most brands do, what most supermarkets do, is say, well, we've chosen a charity. This is the charity we've chosen. Hope you like us more because we've done that. What Waitrose do is subtly shift the situation. So it's no longer Waitrose, the brand, who's the hero. It's the shopper. That's introducing an element of control to a situation which normally is mandated by the brand.
Right.
Doesn't cost them anything, but it will boost appreciation.
Very cool. Very cool. So another thing that Magic Bands do in the park is that you can buy your food and beverage using them. So just one tap, and then there's no cash, no credit card. You just tap. This hits another behavioral science bias.
Yes, and remember, you said 2013, didn't you, when these were introduced? This is a long time ago. This is when people were doing chip and pin, typing in their codes to pay. So at the time, that really removed the friction of purchase. It made it a little bit more abstract, a little bit more throwaway. And it taps into an idea called the pain of payment.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a 2001 study from Duncan Semester at MIT. And he organises auctions amongst students. So for things like baseball tickets or basketball tickets, the twist in the experiment is sometimes he tells people you're going to have to pay with cash. Other times he says you'll have to pay by credit card. Please write down what your maximum bid would be. And what he finds is that people who are told they're going to pay with credit card, they'll bid up to twice. It's not just big ticket items like sporting events, even really small things like mugs or pens got exactly the same effect. So it's not about access to money. It's about what they call the pain of payment. They say the more you can move away from requiring consumers to hand over physical cash, the more you dull the pain of payment and the less price sensitive people become.
I wonder if there's even part of that as to why D2C e-commerce has become so much bigger. There's, the ability to buy on a credit card and not have cash at the very beginning 15 years ago. But now with these, Klarna and Afterpay, to not even have to pay at the moment that you purchase, to pay after the goods are received, it's all about reducing that friction.
Yeah, Apple Pay, Google Pay, contactless payments, every removal of a bit of friction will boost willingness to pay. But it doesn't have to be high tech. Maybe the classic example would be casinos. When you go to a casino, they don't require you to throw down a $10 note on the table.
It becomes a chip.
Yeah, they convert the money into chips, and then once people have chips, they treat it like Monopoly money. It becomes so abstract that it doesn't have that same impact on shoppers.
Do you think this applies to branded money too? For example, I load my Starbucks app with $25, and then I spend against the app. The Dunkin' Donuts, all of these quick service restaurants, you load money onto the app. Once you load it on, I'm not thinking about it as it's my cash in the same way. Even though it's still dollars, it feels different to me.
I think so. I haven't seen a study specifically about those apps, but the broad principle is, that you put that distance, that psychological distance between cash and the act of payment, and in a very wide range of circumstances, it reduces that willingness to pay. Oh, sorry, reduces price sensitivity, so it increases willingness to pay.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Richard, at the end of every episode, we love to wrap it up for our guests and make sure everybody gets the key takeaways. Would you do that for us?
Of course. So 3 big findings we've discussed today. Peak end rule. Mm-hmm. The learning there for marketers is all moments are not equal. Don't try and do everything a little bit better in your customer experience. Instead, pick 1 or 2 moments that you make absolutely excellent. That harnesses the peak part of the peak end rule. And then secondly, make sure you end on a high. And if you do those 2 things, you're going to shape people's memory to your benefit. The second thing, which was a bit of a tangent that we talked about, was this idea of small businesses often knowing more about behavioral science. And I think a lot of that is they have more direct dealings than these professional marketers in giant companies. So think about ways that you can engage with customers more. More important to spend time working in your branch maybe than paying a research company to do a research report. And then finally, the third point we talked about was this pain of payment. People do not treat a $5 cost the same, whatever the format of that payment. The more abstract the payment, the more distance there is from physical cash, the more willing people will be to pay.
Wonderful. So as we like to end, we always like to ask a fun question. Have you been to Disney World? Do you have a favorite ride?
I've never been to Disney World or Disneyland, but I have been to Disneyland Paris.
Aha.
Much easier to get to from England.
Yes.
Favorite ride? I think there was a Wild West one, which was kind of mildly scary. I put myself in the. I don't want to be.
This is like an easy roller coaster.
Yeah.
Very fun. Very fun.
What about you?
We just went with two of my three little kids last year. So we have a 6, 4, and 2-year-old. And when we took the 6 and 4-year-old, we went to It's a Small World.
Yeah.
And that is a classic ride. It's on the water, and you go through all these different cultures.
Yeah.
And they loved it. They loved seeing all the different people from all over the world singing their native songs, more than my wife and I expected.
Yeah.
But right now, It's a Small World is my favorite ride.
Excellent.
Yeah. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, we're finding ways to bring behavioral science to your brands and to your agencies. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.